Hello, and welcome to a new series that I am tentatively calling Dissecting the Frog. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist. I was trying to come up with a new name for a new series because I wanted something that wasn't going to lump, all of my random discussions just into my Rants and Raves series. And I thought this was appropriate because, as my friends and some of my viewers will know, I am a rather pedantic individual. And I thought the phrase dissecting the frog was quite appropriate because, as you've probably heard, the joke that discussing a joke is like dissecting a frog. By the end, everyone understands, but you've ruined the frog. And I thought that was appropriate. However, I'm not sure how that's going to go with YouTube. Fuck it, it's not like I'm getting any help from the algorithm anyway, but the combination of dissecting the frog, which is not the best name to entice people to come watch it randomly, but also the abbreviation isn't any better. That won't get me, well, it might get me a different kind of clicks. We'll see. I'm actually recording this probably at least a month. How many episodes am I at? I'm putting this up at the end of Brigador. That's the plan, for it to be the Sunday video after Brigador ends. We'll see if that actually happens. That's at least a month away, possibly more. I haven't finished recording Brigador yet, so we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So yeah, welcome to the first episode of Dissecting the Frog. We're talking about mechs. Now, if you've been watching the Brigador series, you know that I have some gripes about mechs. But, as with the other episodes in this hopefully ongoing series, I have a couple of other documents going that will be in this series as well, so look out for those in the future at some point. This is really about me trying to more particularly interrogate the specific facets of a topic. It's not necessarily going to be completely comprehensive. Quite on the contrary, it's going to be a very general thing. And it's, as much as the drive is very, very much pedantic, I feel the need to pass along that, at least in my own psychology, my pedantry is out of love. It truly is. I think anything that you love, you should understand in its entirety, warts and all. You should know where it holds up and where it doesn't, and love it for its flaws as well. So we're mostly for the topic of mechs. As you can see, I've put mecha, walkers, and other leg technologies all in the same pool. We're going to look mostly at realistic depictions, but also going to include fantasy settings, because a lot of the arguments are still relevant. And again, this is sort of all-encompassing for multiple types of media. It was spurred along by playing Brigador, but a lot of it's going to come to, well, it's going to be games, movies, anime, TV, all these sorts of things. So, let's get right off the bat with mechs are cool. They're cool as fuck. That's baseline. There's no arguing that mechs are cool. They're the design fantasies of artists and engineers and architects and all types of other, creative people. They're inspiring. They inspire awe. The designs vary dramatically in terms of what their representations are like, and there's so much freedom in how you can design a mech. They're meant to spur something primal in humans. But to that exact point, I don't want anyone to take you know, my criticisms here the wrong way, because I think mechs are cool as fuck. But they're not meant to be practical. Humans like human-shaped things. And especially in the context of media where mechs are in combat, which is mostly what we're going to be addressing here. Combat mechs that are human-shaped are easier to be have like a sympathetic feeling for, or an empathetic feeling, depending on which side they're on. If they are human shaped, it is reminiscent of, you know, the idea of knights in armor and those sorts of things. It has some of that same attachment that goes with that. But it's fundamentally mostly a psychological thing and an art thing more than a true design thing. That said, we'll get back to that portion of it. So next we're going to talk about the economics. And by talk about the economics, I mean we're not going to talk about the economics at all. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to assume that any universe in which mechs exist have the economics to be capable of fielding mechs. The money, the technology, the resources, for all intents and purposes, we're going to treat those as no object. That is down to the writers to convince you in the world that world could field mechs. And as long as they do that successfully, that's entirely a writing thing. So we're just going to ignore that concept with a few minor exceptions. You'll see where that comes up later. So what are mechs for? Where do they go? Well, let's talk about the terrain. Of course, there's terrestrial mechs. I think that's probably the most common, at least certainly in video games. So what are the problems with mechs on terrain? Well, terrain is uneven. It's unpredictable. It's got a lot of problems. Think about how much a human being falls over in the course of its life. Most of you watching this are probably humans. How many times have you fallen over on, you know, under not a lot of prompting? You know, you probably weren't, you know, smacked so hard that you flew across the room. You just, you know, had the tiniest little stumble and you fell to the ground. Well, that problem is exacerbated with mechs for a variety of reasons. They generally tend to be massive. They are working on, on a scale that causes a lot of problems. Obviously, a mech this size is in this picture, which is, I don't know, about 12 to 18 feet tall, hard to tell exactly, is gonna go right over or crush certain small obstacles, but I don't know, it's only got legs that it can lift so far, and beyond that, it's not going to be that fast. But we'll get to speed in a little bit. So, if they're not on land, where might else they be? Well, they might be underwater, or they might be on water. So, what about the surface of the water? Well, mechs are presumably not going to float. It's pretty hard to conceive of a design of a mech that just naturally floats. Boats are designed like boats for a reason, and that's because that's how buoyancy works. But if we're going to ignore the on the surface, how about submersible? Well, water is a fluid. It's a very massive fluid. It takes a substantial amount of force to displace that fluid. There's a reason that submarines are shaped the way they are, and it's because they flow through that fluid with the least resistance possible. With most mech designs, not so much. Do they look cool? Absolutely. But if you were going to do any sort of maneuvering down there, you're up against a lot of forces. And I can't think of any mechs that I've ever seen that were even optimized in any way, let alone fully, for underwater combat. It's usually just, you know, they drop Zaku's in the water and pretend that it's just not an obstacle. So, that's not great. All right, not in the water then. How about in the air? Well, the air has lots of other things like planes and jets and helicopters and even rockets. Air is also a fluid. It's a much more dynamic fluid, but one of the reasons we've designed all these other machines that fly through the air in certain ways is because you've got weather, and it also has aerodynamic considerations that go into it. And if you just fire an oddly shaped object through the air, it's going to tumble and do all sorts of weird things and not be controllable. It's just not optimized for air combat. And admittedly, on this and some of the others I've already mentioned, some of the media that include these things do show some of the caveats. Typically, Gundams are shown to, not be quite as fast as a lot of planes and things that are also in the same universe, but it's fundamentally sort of impractical, but it is cool to look at. All right. Well, you say, where's the final frontier? Space. This might be the arguably the most reasonable place to put them, but I would say it's not great either. Obviously, you don't have a lot of resistance, but again, there's a lot of design that goes into propulsion systems and how to move an object in space. And the more static that object is, the easier it is to calculate how much thrust you have to put into it and the force vectoring and things like that. Presumably, in a lot of cases, space mechs would, are in universes where the technology is so far beyond that presumably a lot of that can be automated. But even getting a mech into space takes an extreme amount of power, and media varies in terms of showing how difficult it is to do that. Some of them use rockets or rail guns or whatever, but as some of you may be aware, in a practical sense, in a real world sense, it is incredibly difficult to get things into space. So much of the mass that we launch into space on a regular basis, the vast majority of it is the propulsion itself, because the fuel and energy required just to lift a small amount of stuff is so massive that the physics of it are just absurd. So getting a 3-story robot into space is completely absurd. But for things like Gundam, we'll hand wave it a little bit and say that if there was one place that it was going to make more sense, it might be space. It's got the least external forces on it that are going to affect it, and that, as we will soon see, is arguably the biggest problem with mechs as a design. So, what about power? Since we're already talking about getting things to where they need to be, we're just going to make this real quick and say, for all intents and purposes, it either has to be nuclear or some sort of incredibly advanced or fantastical system. There is nothing in the universe known to humanity that has the power density and power capability compared to nuclear. You would immediately run out of any sort of other fuel. Presumably you're not going to run it on gasoline or whatever. The energy density simply isn't there. So this is a quick one, but basically most mechs are going to have to be some sort of hyperdense like nuclear, even small mechs, because otherwise they're going to be lugging around just masses of weight that are going to drag them down and make them completely impractical. The energy density is really what counts. So let's talk about mass. Mass. Mechs come in all different shapes and sizes, in a variety of different universes. They vary dramatically in how they're fielded, what they're for, their intended uses, and mass is a problem for a variety of reasons. As I already talked about somewhat in Brigador, a mech fundamentally has to support its own weight. Again, we're excluding space, although space has its own momentum problems. A mech has to support its own weight. The legs have to lift themselves, and then anything that's attached to the legs, presuming legs are used for locomotion, which is kind of our definition here. The more mass that you add, the more the legs have to lift. And the more the legs have to lift, the more massive the legs have to be. This is basically inarguable. For even the most fantastical of settings, the designs tend to reflect that, a massive head requires massive legs to carry it. The exception, of course, being Big Zam. But generally speaking, more mass means more torque, more energy needed to do movement. Since we're talking about mechs, these are not static objects, they're moving objects. And there's engineering considerations to take into account even beyond that. Material considerations are substantial. As we hit the limit in real world considerations for the capabilities of the resources in the universe, basically, we've hit a point with, say, shipbuilding, for example, where we can't make ships any longer. It's physically impossible because the materials that we have to make ships with cannot resist the forces exerted upon them if you make them any longer. The ships will simply break. And that sort of engineering material consideration goes into mechs as well. Most of the mechs on screen right now, I would say, for example, are going to have substantial problems if you're not taking fantastical materials into account. There's just an amount of weight that even if you were to, say, work with titanium or something like that, which the considerations for strength, toughness, and weight are all, optimized as much as possible, there will ultimately always be a cap at which they sort of fundamentally don't work anymore. One of the things that made me make this video in the first place was memories from my childhood of watching an episode of Bill Nye the Science Guy, where they talk about the strength of ants and talking about how a big reason an ant is so strong relative to its size is because of the size that it is. If you scale an ant up directly in size and made it, a foot long, it would collapse under its own weight because the amount of force and power required to exert, resistance against gravity, which is the most basic, don't collapse under your own legs consideration in the case of mechs, fundamentally doesn't work on that scale. Everything has to be rescaled every time. Every time you upsize one component, everything else has to be re-ratioed as a result. So lots of considerations for what we've already talked about in terms of material strength, power delivery, the components that drive it. But even more so, even if you can overcome all those forces, propulsion is going to be an issue, and momentum is going to be an issue. So the larger it is, fundamentally speaking, the more unwieldy and less dexterous it's going to be. It's going to be less avoidable in combat scenarios. It's less, it can't avoid attack, so that means you have to take into consideration things like, all right, if we can't avoid attack, then we have to weather attack. If we need to weather attack, we need to add more armor. If we need to add more armor, it means adding more weight. So what are we going to do there? And it all sort of spirals out of control very quickly. As well, with all of this, in in-universe or real world scenario, you have to take into account wear and repair. No mechanical system is without its wear. So in order to build something, you have to be able to maintain it. If you build a machine that breaks every single day and takes 12 hours to repair, it's not a very good machine, is it? If it's perfect in every other way, if it's literally perfect except for that it wears out, that's not a good machine. So you have that to take into account. In addition to just the sheer mass of these things, let's talk about height. I mean, obviously mechs vary in their size, but in, say, a combat scenario, as we saw in Brigador, the height of a machine means your target size, basically. There's a very good reason why things like in the real world, tanks and those sorts of things become as low profile as possible, and that's fundamentally to make their targeting size as small as possible. A good example with Brigador being the swordfish A-gravs, which just turn to the side and are almost unhittable. Comparatively speaking, with a mech versus, say, a tank or a similarly armored vehicle, you are standing tall. Your vertical profile is the highest of all. So if you're towering over buildings, over treetops, over anything, stealth is less of an option. You're a bigger target. You are a priority target because you look scary. So how do you combat that? Well, as we've already addressed, you got to armor yourself up a bit, but that is sort of a fundamental problem. Would you be better off just trying to build a more typical vehicle and strap the same sort of armament to it? But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves on that one. But we are going to talk about the locomotion factor. So you have a variety of mech types, obviously. The majority of those in fiction tend to be bipedal. That's for the most part what we're talking about in the consideration of like the visual humanity of the mech, the empathy that you feel when they express themselves, or in some cases the animalistic nature of them. And they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. A lot of them bipedal, some quadrupedal, some fucked up other types of things. But compared to something like treads, the locomotion is a substantial problem for a variety of reasons. As I discussed right at the very beginning, walking is difficult. It fundamentally is for any size of being. You lose footing you lose 1 foot of footing on a bipedal thing, or 1 foot on tripedal, or even 1 foot on quadrupedal. things tend to go pretty aggressively wrong pretty quickly. So if you're concerned about, you know, durability or ability to maintain balance in general, let alone considerations for damage, repairs, vulnerability, legs are kind of a bad idea. It's very easy to kick the legs out from under something or shoot them out or whatever, compared to something like, well, like tracks or treads. There's a reason why tracks have been used for a very long time in warfighting vehicles, and that's that they're relatively durable. They have a lot of flexibility in terms of the terrain they can go over. Very rough terrain can be mantled by basically by force, and not a lot has come along to improve upon that because it's pretty difficult to beat. There are some considerations in terms of tracks durability. You know, tracks break and you know, they're targetable, but compared to, say, the knees of a mech, I would say it's a lot harder to target the tracks than that. These are two examples where the tracks are relatively exposed as well, and you can, if you really want to make something that's extra hardy, you can put even more armored there. But yeah, compared to two very clear targets, of which you probably only have to take out one, compared to legs, it's hard to beat. The alternative, of course, is wheels. You know, wheels get discounted a lot, but even with some pretty fundamentally old technology, wheels are incredibly durable. And with the proper drivetrains, they can be almost as effective and usually faster than tracks. They may have there's some trade-offs one way or the other in terms of the type of terrain they can handle. But again, they continue to be used in extremely difficult situations because they have proven themselves durable time and time again. So, yeah, there's some fundamental issues in terms of the design of and the reason for using legs. But if we're going to talk about legs, we should talk about legs and propulsion in general. Obviously, the legs themselves are not the sole propulsion system on some of these mechs. There's also rockets, and you know, in fantastical or sci-fi settings, there can be anti-gravity or other hover systems, of which we're not going to dissect the niceties of the you know, the physics there. We'll just presume that they work because, you know, we concede a suspension of disbelief on a lot of these things. But we have to consider the real world technology that would be applicable for a lot of these things. So let's take motors, for example. A lot of incredible things have been done with motors over time. Efficiency has been greatly improved over the time that we've had motors. But there are some issues with response time, precision, and durability under high strain. And the power density and output, the power output capability, the torque capability relative to size can be pretty tricky, especially on large scales. It's only fairly recently, for example, that we've had motors that are small enough, motors meaning electrical motors, that are small enough but also have the power output capability and the precision to, say, drive the wheels of a car. That's a relatively new development. And there's presumably going to be more development in the future, but there's, you know, fundamental physics considerations that go into that. One of the reasons why it only scales up so fast is that the more you make things smaller, you tend to have side effects like heat buildup or increased wear, like I talked about before, or other considerations that may not be directly involved with the drive system itself, but are considerations for sort of upper limits, either at a particular time or far in the future. So if not motors, then maybe hydraulics. Obviously, you've got the Gecko. Can't really tell what the Gecko has, but the Gecko, along with a lot of others, probably has some hydraulic systems in there. They may be typical hydraulics that use singular pistons, or they may be more like a variety of insects, which use sort of open hydraulic systems. If you didn't know that, a lot of insects, fascinatingly, basically all of their all of their movement is based on pumping their own fluids into certain chambers of their bodies to extend or contract. They don't have muscles in the typical sense. And in either of those cases, obviously, there's some great upsides of hydraulics in terms of their durability and those sorts of things. But there are limitations as well, especially in practical real-world considerations now. They're usually not the fastest. They are relatively prone to leaking and catastrophic failure. There's a lot of considerations that go in there. So especially when you're talking about really massive systems, there's going to be some lag. And as well, hydraulic systems are not light. They're very heavy. I mean, you have to have a liquid. Well, you have to have materials that can contain a liquid and seal them in, but you also have to have the liquid itself, which most non-compressible liquids are quite massive. They're quite heavy. And so making a device, a mech that can use a hydraulic system and also be nimble is sort of the realm of fantasy. But that's neither here nor there. So there are fantastical considerations as well. You know, if you want to talk about things like synthetic muscle or whatever else, it's difficult to dissect those things because typically the artists and writers who think of those things don't really take a huge amount of consideration for the physics. But we'll come right back to that in a second, right after I talk about rockets. So rockets, obviously, or other sort of direct propulsion systems, there's a lot of fantastical stuff that might be in the realm where you just sort of hand wave it. Obviously, like I said before, actual real world rockets tend to spend a huge amount of mass purely on launching themselves, let alone their payload. So in terms of their energy density, they're extremely energy dense, but their burn time tends to be low. Their overall power capability tends to be relatively low. It is high power over a short period. You could make the argument that there's some sort of space technology, future technology, but that's really getting into the realm of fantasy. And to jump back for that, and also the synthetic muscle issue, and pretty much anything else you can argue, if you really want to lock it into reality at all, I'm going to link in the description some articles that are fascinating to me. If you are technically inclined, talking about how basically there are fundamental physics limitations on almost any sort of propulsion device. Anything from, a combustion engine or a steam engine to a rocket to, an ion engine, whatever. Like basically the fundamental math behind them and the physics that governs the universe, means that you can scale things, but it always sort of keeps in cycle with each other. There is no propulsion system known to, the laws of physics, known to humanity, that can sort of defeat these energy density considerations. It always comes down to a trade-off one way or another. So I think those things are fascinating, and I'll try to remember to link those in the description. So we've mostly hit on most of the considerations for the propulsion. I feel like I've made a lot of arguments that get to the core of the issue of just legs are tricky. They're not without their merits, but they are very tricky and probably not the best choice in 99% of scenarios. But let's get into the practical considerations for what is a mech for? Why did we build this thing? Well, in a lot of scenarios, I forgot I was going to talk about this. This is the most modern version, trying to kind of incorporate both the ideas of hydraulics and motors. Everyone's seen, or most people have seen, video of these incredibly advanced motorized arms working in manufacturing. They're very impressive. However, on a fundamental level, they are also extremely massive. They're extremely massive and have very high power requirements, and in a lot of cases, except for specifically except for some specific cases, they tend to be for more precision and less for power. If you have to do really incredibly heavy lifting, which presumably is what legs would be like, they tend to be very slow, or they tend to be very slow and very massive, or you just fall back to using the good old crane, because pulleys really help you along there. The simple machines classes, or the simple machines you learned about as a kid, the rules still apply. They are still some of the fundamental building blocks of how we, use physics to our advantage. But there's always a trade-off. You get more power for more distance, or something like that. So, yeah. So, moving on to why we field these things. Well, in most of the cases we're talking about, in most of the media, we're talking about warfighting of one kind or another. So, well, in war, you have to weather the storm of your enemy. Even if you are particularly dexterous, you're still gonna probably take some hits. Or if you take a hit, you don't want it to be the end of your life for taking one hit. You want to weather at least a little bit and be able to make your retreat. So let's take into consideration some of the real world scenarios. You can either put a lot of mass to absorb or deflect the weaponry of your enemy, but of course, like we talked about, that adds weight. The more weight you add, the more mass you have to add in the fundamental technologies that underlie it. And eventually you just keep scaling up, and eventually you've just made a turtle that can barely move and can weather some damage, but it's not really a mech anymore, is it? You've basically made a bunker that can move very slowly. One of the alternatives in a more modern sense is reactive armor, which essentially, rather than letting a projectile hit the actual material of the thing you're trying to protect, it's essentially an airbag. It detects it when it's impacted. it explodes backwards to deflect, destroy, or otherwise remove the threat of the projectile. So you see the army guys installing it here. Essentially, it's we don't want to make the plates 30 feet thick, so we're going to have a system that tries to defeat it before it can reach us. And there's some developmental stuff that is even more modern that tries to essentially warn of incoming projectiles earlier and earlier and be more and more active in the defense. Obviously, there's also the possibility in a fantastical setting of futuristic alloys that just sort of ignore the reality of material design, or there are energy projection systems and like light shields and hard shields and things like that. And there's not really an argument to be made for or against those things. If the universe supports it, you could, I could make the argument that no, you can't do that, but that's not any fun, is it? Sometimes you just want to suspend your disbelief and say, yeah, light shields make sense. And that's totally fine by me. But in the absence of a universe where that exists, there's a lot of practical considerations to take into account for the armor. So now that we've defended ourselves or attempted to defend ourselves, what about weaponry? Well, you've got basically two classes of weapons. You've got projectile weapons and you've got melee weapons. Sometimes they both exist in a universe, sometimes they don't. And these run the gamut, obviously. But the fundamental problem with both of them is, again, going to be physics. If you are a massive, towering behemoth and you're swinging a sword around, the more you move, the more you're going to offset your center of gravity. Now, as we've already talked about, bipedal things like humans have a tendency to get thrown off balance by surprisingly small forces. And swinging a sword around could certainly throw a human off balance, let alone a mech that has probably been calculated to, optimize to the fullest extent of, we're going to make this as minimally massive as possible and optimize the center of gravity as much as possible, but still be able to throw our sword around. That said, I don't think any of the designs I've ever seen seem like they could survive the fundamental forces of throwing a sword around at any kind of speed. Again, momentum is it's the rule of the road. It's the fundamental flaw in every plan, is when you throw a large mass fast, it has force that continues to move. The inertia of your mass is going to have an effect on the rest of the physics system. So, I don't know. You can try out a melee weapon, but something tells me it may not go great for you. I think, generally speaking, by the time you size up a weapon to be effective enough against the enemies you're fighting, that by that time the weapon is already far too large to be reasonably wielded for the physics that you want to impart. Some of this can be mitigated by really extreme cases of maneuvering. Obviously, there's in a real world hand-to-hand combat kind of thing, you change your footing in certain ways to try and offset some of those forces you're exerting, so you don't throw yourself into a ditch every time you try and swing your sword. But it's still going to be a big problem. The same goes for guns, and that's going to get to another thing that we've already talked about, which is there's recoil. A weapon has recoil. Even, presumably light projection systems, lasers, whatever kind of futuristic garbage probably has mass that, or it's going to have some sort of effect. I don't think I guess there are scenarios where you can hand wave it and just say, oh, this has no mass, it has no recoil, it's whatever. But that gets into the questionably believable area for me. There are, then you get into, in combination with if it's not mass, or if it's not a mass driver of some kind, then presumably it has a power cost. What's that power cost? How does the weapon work? And now we're down a rabbit hole. Not that this whole video isn't a rabbit hole, but you know what I mean. So at that point, you start to ask, why didn't you just build a tank or something else that can carry that same weapon? There are real world examples of this. A variety of real world weaponry that's been applied to multiple platforms, but is, only effective in certain ways on one platform and only effective in certain ways on the other. And the question is, for a mech with a gun, why'd you build a mech? Why didn't you just build a tracked vehicle or a plane or a rocket ship with that gun? Because, as we've talked about all the prior things, the expense of building an entire system that has to hold itself up in the first place versus a system that has already been engineered to be the maximally effective on its chosen terrain, the maximally energy efficient, those sorts of things. Why'd you build a mech with a gun? So, I don't know. Obviously, a lot of this is being it's being kind of hand wavy because I'm not interrogating specific, a specific universe, a specific media, or something like that. But I think in both of these cases, there are some pretty clear problems. So, what are we getting at? What's the conclusion? Well, the conclusion is you can't beat physics. Physics don't want you to have mechs. It's just, there's so much fighting against you, and a lot of those things you're fighting could be minimized or completely eliminated if you just didn't build a mech. Now, don't forget my original premise. Mechs are cool as fuck. So you should still probably try and build a mech. Don't let me stop you. But as I said, sort of near the beginning, mechs are not completely worthless. What are mechs good for? Well, there are some practical potential applications for mechs. They tend to err on the side of really specific, really lightweight jobs. Obviously, Boston Dynamics wouldn't have been making robots for the last 20 years or whatever and having a pretty good time of it, all things considered. Leaps and bounds, no pun intended, ahead of what they were at just a few years ago, if they didn't have some genuine intentions and some, impressive results. But the ones that the automated bipedal and quadrupedal robots they're making, they tend to be small, they tend to be very specific, and 99% of what they're working on is just trying to build a system that isn't too heavy to hold itself up or to do the fundamental, really specific thing that it does. So I have the Boston Dynamics guy there on the left. Then there's, things like the Geckos, or on the right here, I have MOAs from Warframe, which are relatively small and relatively specific and are minimally platformed. where they are fielding basically nothing but their own legs and a weapon or some other type of specialized tool, where their intention is not to carry a human or a being into battle. It's absolute minimum weight on the legs, because they recognize that the more you put on top, the more you have to put on the bottom, and the less useful it's going to be. Obviously, the real world's a little bit different, but in a practical sense, looking at those two worlds, you've got geckos, which are, I don't know, like 10 feet tall. They're pretty substantial, but again, they're 90% legs, because all they have to carry is their weaponry. Likewise with the moas. They're 5 feet tall, thereabouts. And again, they have done the calculation on how much leg do we have to put down to carry 5 pounds of gun or whatever. And we will build it to spec. But carrying a human or some huge armament, it's just not practical. At that point, if you're dealing with something that needs to truly weather combat or to be an all-purpose thing, you're better off fielding, at least in combat scenarios, something that is more optimized for, turtling, and for carrying and whatever else, because the legs are just going to be your downfall. So, specific lightweight jobs, unmanned, rough terrain becomes more of an option when you've got, less mass to carry over it and the legs are a more substantial size. If you have 6 feet of leg height, and the reach to get there, that can get you into some specific cases that, especially when you're small, make it a little bit more useful. And the fundamental conclusion kind of has to be that, evolution works for a reason. Biomimicry is a smart design philosophy, but it only goes so far. It's not the be-all, end-all of design. If you try and scale the ant up, it's just going to collapse under its own weight. Or you can just go the Warhammer 40k route, go full absurd, and make an Imperator class that is so big and absurd that it's carrying a cathedral with guns on its own back. And then you can go ahead and just smash it into the other one from your enemy that is equally, if not more absurd, because nothing makes sense. It's fucking 40k. Anyway, I have no idea how long this video is. It's probably much longer than I intended. Thank you guys for putting up with it. I spent an inordinate amount of time making this video. I probably spent at least 8 hours putting this video together. So I hope you enjoyed it. But you can be honest. If you hated it, if it wasn't interesting or whatever, or, whatever your thoughts are, please let me know. Please let me know what you thought of the content, what you thought of the format, whether this is me being a pedantic shithead is something that anyone enjoys watching. I enjoy doing it, but mainly I just make my friends listen to me do it. So if there's any interest, I don't know, I've got at least 2 more of these on the I was going to say on the chopping block, because I can't remember what I'm trying. I've got two more upcoming, and I've got more ideas all the time, but if nobody cares, then that's fine too. Anyway, I've been the Social Solipsist. Thank you for watching for this absurd video, and I will see you guys next time.